So we display pity, and once we've done that, we feel like we've done our share. Like I feel bad for them. It makes me very sad. I'm so sorry, these things. And I actually think in that there's a real hierarchy that I'm not comfortable with.
All right, let's get started. I am very honored today to be speaking with Birgitte Stærmose, the director of Afterwar. Thank you so much for the time. I really truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me here.
This is Birgitte. This is an absolutely stunning film. It is beautiful. It is moving. It is powerful. Um, What inspired this story? Not the story. I know it's a documentary, but I mean, what made you want to tell the stories of these young people?
I mean, actually, it developed in a slow sort of the one thing took the other. I was in Kosovo in 2006 at a festival,
Hmm.
and somebody approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to do something?" And coming to a post-war country was a very big experience for me. I never had visited a post-war country before I came there. And what I met was a country that was both like it was the youngest country in Europe at the time. So it was full of energy. People were happy, the war was over, they were optimistic, full of, wanting to do things. And simultaneously, and just as strong, was this feeling of like a very heavy collective trauma. Everybody seemed quite traumatized. So it was a very sort of contrasting feeling of being there and also very invigorating in a way. It was very emotional, you can really tell. So I think post-war countries, I mean, other people have told me who visited other post-war countries that, that this feeling, this emotional feeling that the film has is very typical of a place like that. So that was one thing. And then I also felt I was very captivated by the place, like everything was just practical, like we live in worlds where the production designer has arranged everything and we've had time to make things look a certain way. And, and everything there had a practical purpose. It's very pragmatic because they were trying to build up a society after the war. So that made for like a sort of an extreme reality.
Mm.
And I got very curious about what I could do with that. So a local filmmaker approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to do something?" And I said, "Sure, that would be interesting." And I got a bit of funding in Denmark for us to do it. Then the collaboration collapsed because he had a very journalistic approach, and it's not what I had in mind. So we couldn't really, see eye to eye. But at that point, we had decided to do a film with these children that were selling cigarettes and peanuts and chewing gum on the streets. And this phenomenon of having children do that in Kosovo at this time, it was a post-war phenomenon. Kosovo is not a country that before the war where any children would be out doing anything like that.
Hmm.
So it was something that families were brought to do out of pure desperation, pure survival. Like typically the families had either lost a father or the father might be paralyzed or traumatized or incapacitated and could not support the family anymore. Or or also they had they had had to leave their home during the war and were out of home and were squatting somewhere. So there were families that were really suffering and really struggling to just get food on the table. And for that reason, they sent the kids out to sell in the streets just to get a little more income. So I met the kids, and in 2008, I did a short film with them. And just to jump ahead a little bit to afterwar, 8 years later, because this experience of doing this short film with them was just something that, you know, that really stayed with me and with the crew. we would often talk about it, the experience of making the film, both creatively, but also especially with them. And with some of them, I kept in contact, some less so, some kept in contact with the members of the crew. So there was some contact, but nothing formalized. And after 8 years, I'm somebody who loved a film like Boyhood, because of this seeing people age on screen. I think it's just magical. So I thought, and also I was getting more and more curious about like how were they surviving? Like what were their possibilities? How were their lives developing? What could they do? What couldn't they do? And I became aware, I mean, I was aware, but started to think about this predicament. Of poverty and when you're stuck, And I just thought, like we really like the Hollywood narrative that you have a problem and a conflict and there's always a solution, and within the story we managed to give the solution or give the hope. And I thought it's interesting to me how we rarely are able to tell the story about the relentlessness of poverty, for example, and how difficult, if you're stuck in poverty, it is to actually get out. We don't talk much about that. We talk more about the opportunity or the hope or the strong character. And these kids and adults in my film, they're super strong. I mean, they're very strong survivors, all of them. But I could see that they were struggling to, make a life, and they had gotten into their 20s, and when you're in your 20s, what you do is you start to really plan for your life. You think about, am I somebody who wants to have kids? What kind of job am I going to have? Where am I going to live? Am I going to get married? Am I going to, all these things become what occupies you. And it also did for them, but their opportunities were much more difficult, and it was much more difficult to sort of see what was the road going to be. And so I went back after the 8 years and looked up everybody, found everybody. I mean, they were not so difficult to find. They mostly lived in Pristina, and there was some contact, and they knew each other. But I met up with everybody and asked them if they were interested in doing another film. We watched the old film again and talked about the experience. And then I said, "Look, would you like to make another one?" And they did. So that's how this film came about.
There's real power in that. You absolutely, you talk about Boyhood. Of course, that's a fictional film with real growth. Um, but there's real power in seeing these young people and sitting in the same spaces,
Mhm.
walking the same train tracks, and realizing that this is their story continued on. How does an experience like that affect you? Because again, these are not actors, although the fascinating play going on here between reality and storytelling is fascinating. But what was that experience like for you? Because again, real people, real stories, and still, roughly 8, 10 years pass from the time you met them to the time that you continue it on. How does that affect you personally?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, in making the film, I haven't been so concerned about how I felt, actually. Does
Mm.
it, I don't, that might sound strange, but I haven't. Um, of course, it's difficult, you know, but making the project with them, I feel, you know, it's been very empowering for all of us, I think, to make the film, to actually do something, you know. So of course the film has a certain bleakness, but there's also in the project, a powerfulness. I mean, in the film when they say, I don't talk to my mother or my friends or my family about what happened when I was a child, that they were out selling on the streets. That was absolutely true when we started making the film. And I put it in the film, and it's not like they started to talk with their friends and family while we were making the film. So when we stood in Berlin and had the world premiere, it was still true. And in a way, the film has been sort of a coming out with the story in a different way
Mm.
for them. So it's kind of stepping out of the silencing of the trauma of their childhood. And actually, and it's, in Kosovo, it's very taboo because it's culturally really not thought of as okay to send your children out. It's really not thought of as okay, less so than maybe some cultures, it's really not thought of as okay. So it's a very taboo thing, and which is why it's been silenced. Nobody wanted to be reminded that it happened, that they got to a place where they didn't have a choice.
Mm.
And I find that with the cast of the film, having made the film and having talked about it to the audience and having the audience receive them with a lot of warmth has actually really made a difference. I can see that they're sort of, every time I see them, they have grown a little bit, in terms of sort of dignity. We won the audience award in Kosovo at Dokufest,
Mm.
which for me was the biggest moment because of this, because they've stepped out of a silencing and a taboo. And they were very nervous about the screening in Kosovo. They were like, do we have to go? I'd rather not go. I don't want to talk to journalists. They were very reluctant because of the taboo. And they did go to the screening, and then they won the audience award. And I think that acknowledgement that they started to speak about it, and the warmth that that was met with has really meant a lot. I mean, when they were in Denmark for the premiere, one of them said, in Berlin after the world premiere, people came up and hugged me, you know, you know. So I mean, I guess my feelings up in those places, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I love about this film is, you can sense the power of them telling their story. There's one of the gentlemen says that if, after the war, telling our story, we all suffered the same fate, but we don't speak of it anymore. And, if we hadn't experienced it, I wouldn't have known it had happened. Like, this is stuff that had taken place and seems in the distance, but for them, it's a reality they carry with them. And I think to hear them tell their story, I can sense, what you're saying there is there's a sense of empowerment that is coming through. I did want to ask you about the structure because this is unlike any documentary that I've seen before. Oftentimes what you see is you see them interview you get an interview with them and whatnot. You watch them go about their day, and there's a sense of that here. But there's this element of almost theatrical, like that comes through when they speak. Like they speak directly to the camera, to the audience. And I was wondering why you chose to tell the story in that way.
Yeah, I can give you an explanation for that. And you're absolutely right. It is theatrical. And I don't even myself call it a documentary. I call it a film, because they do perform. I mean, how I like to describe it is that they perform versions of their own lives. It's
Mm,
not even necessarily factually correct, but it's
mm,
emotionally correct.
mm,
And what happened was that when I did the first film, both the first short, which is in the longer film of Afterwar, and Afterwar, the method that I have used is that I have interviewed them. I've done these very long audio interviews and transcribed those, and then taken the interviews and written material for them to perform.
mm,
So in a way, it's their own words or their own stories that then move into a performative space.
mm,
And the reason I chose originally to have that form to the film was that I had an experience that I went to Kosovo and I did these interviews with the children, and it was heartbreaking. It was very tough to listen to.
yeah,
And I would come home and I needed to decompress. I needed to share it with some people I knew. So I would start to tell them, my friends and family about what I had experienced, what they had told me. And what I found was that people very often, fairly quickly, interrupted me, or sort of by saying, "Oh, I feel so bad for them," and that is so sad. So they expressed very strong pity. But then what they would do once they had done that is they would switch the topic to something else,
Mm.
something more comfortable. And I just became very aware that, those of us who have privilege, what we do, when we meet people who are less fortunate than we are, is to display pity. Like we kind of, I think it's a way to get past it, actually.
Mm.
So we display pity, and once we've done that, we feel like we've done our share. Like I feel bad for them. It makes me very sad. I'm so sorry, these things. And I actually think in that there's a real hierarchy that I'm not comfortable with, because then all of a sudden it's those of us who can feel pity and those of us who can be pitied around,
Yeah.
and I wasn't comfortable with that. And I also thought, this is ridiculous. What are they going to use your pity for? When people would express this pity, because I'd just been with them, I thought, has nothing to do with them. The fact that you feel sorry for them doesn't make a hoot of a difference. Even if I told them, they'd be like, okay, thank you, but you know, can I have some money? I mean, it just didn't, it didn't change their lives one bit. So
Yeah.
it's a very passive reaction. And so in making the film, because originally they were children, and because children by definition are innocent beings, I believe that. You know, children are innocent, they can't be anything else.
Yeah.
And so therefore, of course, you would immediately feel like whatever they were going through was not their fault, which it wasn't, and you would immediately feel sorry for them. And I thought, well, okay, but I don't want my film to just have people sit and feel sorry for them. I want them to be take them in more deeply.
Mm.
And so what I went to see a play, actually a Belgian play that had like 20 children on stage. And what these children would do is they would say back to the audience in monologues, they would say, you tell me that I should believe in God. You tell me I shouldn't believe in God. You tell me that I have to go to the bathroom when I wake up. You tell me I have to brush my teeth. All these things that adults would tell children, they spoke them back to the audience. And it was actually very confrontational
Mm.
to sit and listen to it. And I thought, wow, there's a real power when children all of a sudden speak back to you in big words.
Mm.
Like we assume they don't have that capacity. And these kids, didn't have so much capacity for being verbal because they would move around at night and nobody wanted to talk to them. And they wouldn't spend so much time at home. So they weren't actually talked to very much.
Mm.
So I thought, if I take these kids, because I felt that their soulfulness and their sort of sense of their existence was way beyond their age. What they had experienced was way beyond their age. And they saw a lot. They really saw a lot and they knew a lot. So I took the interviews with them and I gave them to this Danish dramatist, Peter Asmussen, and asked him to write monologues for them.
Mm.
That were big, that took these big existential questions, let them talk about that. So that's how the form came. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I wanted I wanted the audience to be confronted by their humanity in a more radical way, because I didn't want people to just sit and feel pity. Because I think it's a way of putting somebody over in a corner and saying, oh, poor you.
Yeah.
But I wanted people to really, because I think we get through other people's misery. We get through it by experience it, by actually not giving them their full humanity. I think actually, and I don't even want to be criticizing it, because I think it's a survival mechanism that we do need
Yeah.
to survive
Yeah.
when there's a lot of misery. Because if you take each and every person in and really think about it with your own humanity, like what is it like to be this person? It becomes too much. But in the film, I wanted people to do that. you know So that's why it has that form. It came from that whole experience and that whole way of thinking.
There's a moment where one of the kids looks at the camera and says, "Take the picture. Go ahead, take the picture." And I underst like I could feel that moment so heavily. I mean, I've been involved in trips to places of struggle in great struggle and helped and served, and the attitude of take a picture, um, as it can be used as some form of, like you said, pity. It's like, oh, that's too bad. See this kid, and then we show the photo, and it's like, oh, that's too bad out there. So when he said that, that broke me. I was like,
Mm,
this is absolutely stunning.
mm.
And I love what you're saying here because there is an empathy for humanity as opposed to isolating this situation and these kids and say, oh, poor them. And
Yeah.
we are part of that for sure. Um, and Birgitte, I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
but
okay.
this is wonderful. Really appreciate the chance to chat with you because Afterwar is absolutely stunning. So
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for sharing it with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to me about it. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I wish you the best. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
Bye.